Jerome, my friend, welcome back. How you doing, buddy?
Doing fantastic, John. Thanks for having me, brother.
Oh man, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. How you holding up with this whole COVID and the lockdown and all this stuff?
Great. I got to admit, at first it was different. I think everybody's schedule got
Hmm.
upended a little bit, but the one certainty in life is change. And
Oh yeah.
anytime you rest on your laurels, and you know it, especially owning your own business,
Hmm.
the more comfortable you get, the more concerned in a sense you should be. Things are always changing, always have
Yeah.
to constantly adapt. The market has changed enough over the years, even since the internet days with how sales and marketing works,
Hmm.
that you always have to be looking for what's coming up next. So, in a lot of ways, you're seeing the best and most creative and most resourceful out of people out of this.
Yeah.
And that part of it, I really love so far. So, I'm doing great. How you holding
Good.
up?
Well, that's great. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. It's like I would love to have the gym open, as I'm sure most people would. It's like the whole. I was just getting back into the swing of things after my knee surgery and everything, and
Mhm.
it's like I was just getting a good roll going on. I had dropped down about 30 pounds, and then it's like, oh, we're shutting up the gym, and I'm like, and I got
Yeah.
very little stuff here around my house that I can do, other
Mm.
than an exercise bike and walking up and down steps and a resistance band. But I'm doing the best I can and staying
Good.
busy. And that I think that's really important, and that's kind of why I had you on the show today, is because I want to talk about how people, especially in situations like we're in now, but not only that, but just in general, how you can go about having a pretty much a minimalistic style workout program. And I know you're all about that. I mean, you do everything from a lot of isometric work to things like that. So I figured you were the
Mhm.
best person to have on the show to talk about it.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and thank you again for that. The way I look at it, time is our most valuable resource. You can always make more money. You can always learn a skill, a trade, a craft, but that's predicated on the idea that you're going to have time to do it. And uh, for me, exercise is great. It's fantastic. It's good for you physically, mentally, emotionally. But I want to spend the least amount of time possible in the gym exercising to get the best degree of results. And then I want to get the hell out of the gym so I can go home, rest, recover, and actually work on other things in my life that I care about, passions, interests, and stuff like that. So the recognition of a more minimalist approach to exercise comes from the idea and the understanding that exercise is a physical stress on the body, and too much of any stress will produce deleterious health effects.
Right.
So, in a lot of ways, because it's a physical stress, and the typical metaphor that's used is analogous to like trying to acquire a suntan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in a lot of ways, you should be trying to see what's the least amount that I can do for the best degree of results, and then spend that time on other things that are also of equal or greater importance in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, it's it's so much. I mean, I'm one of those guys that, and maybe it's because the gym is my release. It's kind of
Mhm.
like my place to blow off steam. For a long time, it was nothing for me to go to the gym and spend 2 hours, and
Yeah.
that was just like doing cardio and lifting.
Mhm.
Now I still find myself when the gyms are open, I still wind up spending an hour and a half or 2 hours there, but I have this whole ritual that I do where it's like I usually do about 10 minutes of warm up before I do any kind of lifting because I want to get the blood flowing. I want to elevate my core temperature, things like
Yep.
that. And then I'll do the weights. And then I typically finish off with 15, 20 minutes of cardio. But then I like to hit the sauna afterwards for about a half an hour.
Yeah.
And then after
Mhm.
that, I like to jump into a nice cold shower for about 15 minutes. So I still
Mhm.
wind up spending a lot of time at the gyms when it's open, but it's not
Yeah.
so much in the workout in itself as it is
Mhm.
all of the other things that I want to do. And, it's like you don't have to spend that amount of time. What you were just saying is
Right.
exactly right. You can get a very, very effective workout in a short period of time. It's all about
Mhm.
focusing on your form and all these other different things. You can use isometrics as a way to apply a lot of metabolic stress and cellular
Mhm.
stress at the muscle level. So and I know you're like really well versed in that. So why don't you like break down for people how isometric exercises work and how you can use them to shorten the time frame of your workout and maximize your results.
Sure. The first thing I would say, touching on the last thing that you said, is if somebody goes to the gym for that mental and emotional relief, and because it makes them feel good, it blows off some stress from work, I would never take that away from them. So it's important to frame this conversation within the context of just looking at how to get the best degree of results with the minimal time investment. And given that a lot of people don't necessarily have access to the gym, that becomes a more likely scenario than once things reopen. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea with isometrics is, and the way I tend to look at it is, you have three levels of strength. You have the lifting, which is the concentric. You have isometric,
Mm-hmm.
which is holding statically, and then you have the lowering, which is the eccentric.
Right.
And studies have been done on isometrics. And as long as you train to a point of momentary muscular failure, where despite your greatest effort, you can't physically, mentally, or emotionally exert any more effort to try and move a weight against direct resistance,
Mm-hmm.
you've essentially elicited the growth response, a size and strength increase. Um, Now, we all know this through conventional lifting, the way that most individuals will traditionally do a set of, let's just say, bicep curls. So if you're doing a set of curls, just conventionally, let's just say 1 or 2 seconds up, 1 or 2 seconds down, the
Mm-hmm.
first repetition is really easy. Successive repetitions become progressively harder and harder because different muscle fibers are slowly fatiguing. On the last all out 10th repetition, if the most physical exertion that you could exert against resistance was 10 repetitions, on that
Mm-hmm.
last rep, you will reach a point where, despite your greatest effort, that weight will not move.
Right.
At that point, the muscle fibers are still contracting, but not all of them are contracted. And that's a conflation that a lot of people have sometimes.
Right.
As long as you are forcibly contracting those muscles against resistance to the point of momentary muscular failure, once they have enough metabolic stress and reach that point of momentary muscular failure, you will have elicited the growth response. So
Right.
the way isometrics works is, instead of, for example, doing a bicep curl and doing 10 repetitions that are all out,
Mm-hmm.
an isometric bicep curl, you would essentially get into a position near halfway through the range of movement, because the extreme points of the range of movement tend to be a little bit more dangerous towards the joints.
Right.
Um, and you would gradually build tension against your resistance. And this is best done with an immovable resistance. You gradually build tension over the course of maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Then you exert yourself as hard as you feel you safely can for, I recommend 30 seconds. And then I recommend backing the tension down for another 10 to 15 seconds until you eventually release from that resistance. So all
Mm-hmm.
you're really doing with isometrics is you're eliminating the first 9 repetitions, where you slowly fatigue the muscle and warm it up by lifting and lowering. And you're just
Right.
taking it, starting it off at that point where you can no longer move the weight, and you're exerting a maximal effort over a reduced period of time. And because in physics, force is mass times acceleration,
Right.
if you gradually push into an immovable object, there's essentially no mechanical work being done, and you are drastically reducing the peak forces that are being exerted on your joints while still taking the muscles to the point of momentary muscular failure. So isometrics, if safely and properly performed, I contend are a more effective and efficient way to reach momentary muscular failure. But they're also very, very intense. Some people just
Yeah.
don't like them, and that's fine.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's actually I actually read a study. I don't remember where it was published or whatnot, but I know I remember reading a study where they were talking about how the advantage of isometric exercise for people that had issues with joints, it was much more advantageous to, use the isometric method versus, doing the standard, banging out the reps, going through the full range of
Yeah,
motion, because of that fact that you're just it's static, but yet you're still applying force. Um,
right.
what would you say the advantages, or if let me back up,
Sure.
if are there differences in the amount of hypertrophy or muscle strength, muscle size that you can gain using isometrics versus traditional methods?
Sure. There's surprisingly been a couple studies done on this by James Steele, Brad Shainford, James Fisher have all done resistance training studies with this. And the first one that comes to mind, and I have a couple notes here. James Steele did a study, the minimum effective training dose required to increase one repetition max strength in resistance trained men. And it was a meta-analysis and found that one set to failure 2 to 3 times a week can produce suboptimal, but still significant increases in size and strength. So should have started the conversation with that. You don't need a lot of volume to produce a significant size and strength increase. But in regards to just isometrics or even using no load at all, there was a study done by Counts and some other people called the acute and chronic effects of no load resistance training, which is essentially what isometrics is. And what they had was a group of individuals, and they had one arm do bicep curls, and they had one arm, just someone squeezing the muscle in that arm, contracting with no resistance through the entire range of movement. And what they found was both arms grew the same amount in terms of size. And this is backed up by a study done by Brad Shanefield, showing the effects of called the effects of different intensities of resistance training with equated volume load on muscle strength and hypertrophy. And what they did is they split individuals into groups, training in anywhere from 20% to 80% of your one repetition max. So what that means, if you're capable of lifting 100 pounds one time and one time only, they performed an exercise with as little as 20 pounds and as high as 80 pounds. And what they found was with the groups lifting within the 40% to 80% range, there was no significant difference in size and strength increase. With the group that was using lower loads, the 20%, there was a strength increase between the two groups, but not a size increase. So for most individuals, the load that you use, the amount of weight is largely irrelevant as long as you take it to that point of momentary muscular failure. But if that's true, the next logical step then is to say, if you can get the same degree of results in terms of a size and strength increase from a very light load or a very heavy load, it only stands to reason that you should use the lighter load because you're generating significantly less peak forces on the joints. And anybody who's lifting long-term, unless you're like a professional strength athlete, like a power lifter, strongman, where it is about the weight. If you're just lifting for aesthetics, to build muscle, to lose fat, for overall health and longevity, you have to look at resistance training in other conditions besides just building muscle. There's increased joint flexibility, there's increased joint composition, metabolic conditioning, cardiovascular conditioning, are all factors of functional training that need to be considered when building your resistance training plan. So to bookend that, whether it's isometrics or whether it's low weights or high weights, as long as you take a muscle safely to that point of momentary muscular failure, the weight that you use is basically irrelevant. And because the weight is irrelevant, you should train in the safest manner possible, which basically mandates the use of lighter weights.
Yeah, yeah. I actually remember, and I need to write some of this stuff down when I read these studies. I read another study where they took like 45 people, and I think like if I remember correctly, 20 of them of them were women and 25 were men. And what they actually did was they had them just imagine that they were flexing their biceps, and what they would do is they had to do it for like 4 15-minute segments a day. So it like totaled an hour, but they would split it up. And, you know, for 15 minutes, they would sit there and just imagine that they were flexing their biceps as hard as they possibly could. And all of the subjects that did this gained both muscle size and strength just by simply imagining that they were doing it. So it kind of makes you wonder. I mean, as you well know, the mind and the body are so intertwined and connected. It's crazy. It kind of makes you wonder if the mind can actually trigger processes in the body just by thinking about them hard enough that can cause those kind of metabolic adaptations. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about it.
Right. And that would be fun to speculate about. It's undeniable there's something about resistance training, at least past a certain threshold of intensity, that creates the growth response. But We have to remember that we're animals too. And you remember Pavlov's dogs, the old psychology
Yeah.
experiment where you feed
Right.
a dog, you ring a bell, you feed a dog, you ring a bell, and then eventually you ring the
Mm-hmm.
bell and like they start drooling.
Right.
We're the same way. It's called classical conditioning. So I could see
Mm-hmm.
if you spent that much time in your head visualizing that contraction, one, you might actually just be contracting the muscle and not realizing it. You might be doing an
Right.
isometric contraction. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in whatever position the muscle is in, which could lead to the point of momentary muscular failure, which could cause a growth response. But
Mm-hmm.
two, if you're used to visualizing a weight as you're lifting it and feeling the muscle work through that path of resistance, you're
Mm-hmm.
you're classically conditioning that same thing when you're sitting and visualizing the muscle. But if you find
Right.
that, send it to me. That's
I
fascinating.
will. I will. Yeah. I'll have to do some. I'll have to do some searching and dig that back up because it was really really interesting to read. But
Hmm.
and you're right. It may be in fact that there was actually some sort of contraction going on at that point in time.
Hmm.
It could also be a hormone response that was triggered
Yeah,
by the
that could.
brain, which is something that I thought of immediately when I read it.
Mhm.
Um, the reason I brought that up is everybody has this concept that, if you want to gain muscle size, if you want to gain strength, if you want to effectively put metabolic stress on the muscle for whatever the goal is that you're trying to reach, they think that you just have to go in there in the gym and you have to do this and you have to do that. And you don't have to. There are other ways, there are other avenues to reach your goals. It's all about figuring them out.
Right. And you need to keep in mind what a muscle is. A muscle contracts, and it has a number of physiologic functions, but with regards to size and strength increases, it contracts because of a signal coming from an innervating nerve that tells the muscle
Mm-hmm.
to forcibly contract. So the muscle doesn't know what angle you're working it from. It doesn't have the physiologic capability to be confused. I know muscle confusion is a thing that's promulgated by a lot of people. And I think it's appropriate in a different context. Um, but a muscle just knows forcible contractions.
Right.
And I think, again, as long as you train a variety of muscle fibers to that point of momentary muscular failure, um, using a variety of loads or stimuluses, you will have some degree of a size and strength increase. So,
Mm-hmm.
your job when you go to the gym or whether you're doing something at home is to use whatever equipment that you have, even if you don't have equipment at all. I think that's still fine. Um, but to work the body in concordance with how it's designed, to be
Mm-hmm.
congruent with joint and muscle function. And if you do that, I think anybody, even if they don't have equipment, can come out of this lockdown whenever it ends. And it's been what, 6, 7, 8 weeks now, with
Yeah.
more muscle and less fat. If you
Mm-hmm.
just train the body intelligently. There was
Right.
another study done in the International Journal of Exercise Science. I know a lot of the bros are thinking like, I'm going to lose so much muscle out of this.
Oh yeah.
And there's a study done that 3 weeks of detraining does not decrease muscle fitness, strength, or sport performance in adolescent athletes. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what I would posit, what a lot of people think is they're losing muscle is they're losing strength because they're not conditioning specific movements.
Right.
The more you perform and practice any specific movement, the more effective you condition that neuromuscular pathway. But if
Yeah.
you don't do it for a while and you go back to it, it doesn't mean that you necessarily lost a lot of muscle. You could have built muscle in that meantime, but you're just not as efficient doing that same movement that you've previously done. I tried
Right.
riding a bike the other day, and I haven't ridden a bike in probably 20 years. I've ridden a lot of
Yeah.
motorcycles, but getting back
Mm-hmm.
on a bike, I almost ate it a few times.
Yeah.
Now, did I lose a bunch of muscle because I haven't been riding bikes or my hip flexors severely
No.
atrophied compared to the time I was 14 years old? No,
Nope.
I don't have that same conditioned pathway. And then once you get at it again, then you start reconditioning that. So I think that's the biggest thing that happens with a lot of people thinking they're going to lose muscle. And a lot of that can really mess with your head when you go back to the gym and your bench press is down 40 pounds. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that you necessarily lost muscle. And but like I said, I think a lot of people can come out of this with more muscle and less fat by the time the gyms reopen if they're doing things correctly.
Well, yeah, because when you break it right down to brass tacks, like you don't really. The only way you really lose muscle tissue is if you're not eating adequate protein. Once those muscle cells
Mhm.
are there, they're there, And as long as you
Yeah.
keep feeding those muscles, as long as you still have the protein levels, like you watch professional bodybuilders and you watch them go through their career and then you watch them retire, you will notice
Mhm.
that a lot of them lose muscle mass, but it's not just because that they go off of steroids. Okay, it's well, I mean, that's a thing that happens.
Right.
Obviously, they're not feeding their body those artificial hormones and whatnot, so you do have muscle loss from there. But the main thing is their diet changes. They're not eating
Yep.
500 grams of protein a day. They might be eating
Mhm.
200 or 250. So,
Mhm.
you through your nutrition and through other things that change, that's where they lose the size of the muscle. But
Yeah.
for everyday people that are just going to the gym, that were pretty habitual going to the gym 4 or 5 days a week, now that we're in this lockdown, even if the lockdown lasts another 2 or 3 months, you're not really going to lose muscle mass so long as you're paying attention to your nutrition. You may lose strength,
Right. Mhm.
because at the end of the day, I try to tell people strength versus muscle. Strength is more like the ability to recruit the muscle fibers. Once the muscle fibers are there, they're there. It's
Mhm.
your ability to call upon them to make them do work. And that's the difference between strength and size as far as that goes. Hey guys, I just wanted to jump in here and make sure that you're enjoying the video. I'm sure you are. And if you like what I'm doing, please subscribe to the channel, click the bell, make sure you select the all feature so that way you get notified when new episodes of my podcast drop. And if you would, right up here in the top right hand corner of my channel where my links are, there's a Patreon link. If you guys could help out there, it'd grease the wheels to keep this thing moving, and I surely would appreciate it. Now, let's get back into the video.
Yeah, agreed. And to further illustrate that, they've done studies with cyclists who are elite, like world level cyclists, and then they'll have them run sprints, which is a similar movement of the leg articulating around the hips, but
Mm-hmm.
their cardiovascular fitness and endurance is not anywhere near as close in other forms of cardiovascular training compared to cycling,
Right.
because they've become so efficient at that particular movement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I totally agree with you. And yeah, thought I had something, but nope.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Well, I mean, I'll give you I'll give you a real well. You know by now we've talked a number of times, and you know that I'm a big wrestling fan. Now,
Mhm.
I'll give you a real world example. They have one wrestler in professional wrestling. His name is Antonio Cesaro. This
Mhm.
guy probably, I'm gonna say he's like 6'1", maybe 6'2", and he maybe weighs 210, 215. He's very, very lean, probably runs about no more than 10 to 12% body fat on any given
Mhm.
day. Um, and pound for pound, he's the strongest man in the WWE. He goes in the
Mhm.
gym and he lifts weights with guys like John Cena and some of these Braun Strowman, who's like an absolute friggin' monster. And
Yeah.
he goes in and he bench presses as much as they do. He squats as much as they do, and he's half their size.
Yeah.
So when you sit back and you look at that, his muscles aren't as big as, say, one of the other guys, yet he's
Right.
just as strong, and in some cases even stronger. And it's all
Mhm.
about he has the ability to recruit more muscle fiber than the other guys do, plain and simple.
R And for a variety of movements too, sometimes being smaller has its advantages because you have
Mm-hmm.
smaller levers that are contracting against resistance, which is amazing that Hafthor Bjornsson set that deadlift record being a taller guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Shorter guys are at a significantly better advantage with a deadlift because they have a
Mm-hmm.
smaller range of movement to travel. They have to bend over less far. So
Exactly.
Hafthor pulling that was amazing. The
Mm-hmm.
example I use, if you and I are doing bicep curls and we curl the same amount of weight, but the length
Mm-hmm.
from your forearm to where the center of the weight is in your hand is 1 inch longer. So if my lever length is 10 inches and yours is 11 inches, you have to
Right.
apply 10% more force to lift that same amount of weight. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, smaller guys and women actually are often stronger pound for pound than men. So looking at
Yeah.
especially powerlifting, some of the guys that might be like 130, 140 pounds that are putting up, 500, 600 pound lifts is truly incredible for the amount of strength that they're able to generate on that frame.
Yeah.
And that also goes to reason that as a muscle gets bigger, it's able to contract less efficiently because if you're
Mm-hmm.
if you're looking through the center of a bicep, as that bicep gets more voluminous, it has to go
Hmm.
around the outside, and it's not contracting in that direct line.
Right.
So yeah, there is a strong correlation between size and strength, and I tend to look at strength as um, it's a good indicator, especially if you're losing fat, if you're maintaining or gaining strength, that muscle isn't going anywhere. But you nailed it. Muscle is a very expensive, metabolically active tissue. If
Hmm.
you're giving your body enough protein and your strength is not falling through the floor despite regular exercise, that muscle is probably not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an invalid concern I think a lot of people have.
Yeah, I mean, you see it all over social media, people bitching and complaining because the gyms are closed. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong, I get it. I hate the fact that the gyms are closed, but
Mm,
they're like, oh, bro, I'm losing my gains, and I'm like, no, bro, you're not. You know what I'm saying? You're not losing your
yeah,
gains as long as you're
yeah,
eating right. And you know
right, exactly.
yourself, it doesn't matter what you do. Well, I won't say it doesn't matter, but at the end of the day, when we go in the gym, the only thing we do is create metabolic stress.
Yep,
Okay, what happens from that stress is all in our diet. It's one hundred
exactly.
percent in our diet. Well, it's like mostly in our diet, and then a little bit about recovery because recovery is important too.
Right.
So yeah, definitely. If people are eating right and they're getting the adequate amounts of protein, they're not going to lose muscle
Mhm.
size. So now let me ask you,
Sure.
if you were just if somebody came along and like a new client approached you and was like, look, I'm in an area, I know I'm looking at least 3 more months before my gym opens up. I
Mhm.
need to create some kind of home workout, but I have very, very little to no equipment at all. How would you recommend they get started building a workout?
Sure. I think first I would ask them what equipment they have, how frequently they would like to work out, what their workout history is, just to determine their individual preferences. I used to really draw a hard line and just say, do this. But if someone doesn't stick to it, it's not going to serve them as well. And
Right.
one admonition that I always go back to is a plan that is a 6 out of 10 in terms of like effectiveness that you consistently follow will trump a 10 out of 10 plan that you only follow intermittently.
Hmm.
So first and foremost, just determine their individual preferences. But if somebody has no equipment, they're fairly new to working out, um, I think you can build a very appreciable physique, especially really early on in your training. Just focusing on chin ups, if you have one of those things that can hook under a door,
Right.
body weight squats, if done properly, and push ups. And if you're doing that, you're working the majority of the major and minor muscle groups in the body that can be
Hmm.
stimulated to the point of momentary muscular failure. And whether you're in the gym, whether you're working out at home, whether you have bands, no equipment at all, or whether you're using weights or a machine, the sole purpose of performing any exercise at all is just to elicit a size and strength increase. And that happens from taking the target of muscle groups to the point of momentary muscular failure.
Hmm.
So, while a lot of workout equipment is sold out, it's really hard to go to like a Dick's Sporting Goods or even find workout equipment on Amazon. You could probably find
Right.
something to do pull ups off of. And if
Hmm.
you can't do pull ups, there's a workaround you can do with that. But I would just probably put somebody on a circuit of like one set of bodyweight squats, one set of push-ups, one set of chin-ups to momentary
Hmm.
muscular failure, have them rest for a few minutes, and then I would probably have them repeat that same circuit. And
Right.
if they were brand new, I'd have them do that every other day, probably Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and
Hmm.
we would track progress from there. Um, when somebody is brand new to training, and you know it, and anybody who's spent some time in the gym knows that you get your best results typically within the first 6 to 8 months of training. You get those noob gains,
Yep.
and and in that regard, it's because everybody has a certain amount of genetic potential with which they can build muscle. And if you're brand new to training, let's just say you have this far of a distance to cover,
Hmm.
and the longer you train, the closer you get to your genetic limit. Your genes will determine how much muscle you can build. So after that first year, you might knock out 3/4 of that. And the longer you train, in a lot of ways, the less important a lot of those specifics are because you have less ground to cover. And the advantage of beginning training is you have this whole big gap of potential that you just have to tap into. So um, At that point, it would just be focusing on training compound pushing and pulling movements to the point of momentary muscular failure. Really, really, really focusing on diet, make sure they're getting adequate protein without over consuming calories,
Mm-hmm.
and making sure they're getting enough rest between the workouts. Again, a workout is a physical stress that is imposed on the body for the purpose of eliciting a size and strength increase, and you can overtrain. Any physical stress can be taken to the point from which the body has a tremendously difficult time recovering from it. But
Mm-hmm.
you grow when you recover, and you said it best, with adequate protein, with enough time between workouts, that's really when you grow. But you go to the gym, you work out just to get that mechanism started, just to trigger the stimulus, just to light that fire, and then you
Yep.
grow in recovery.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to talk. I want to go back and touch on something that you actually just said.
Sure.
It's taking time in between. Recovery isn't just, you know, going home and getting 8 hours sleep. It's
Mhm.
taking some time in between your workouts. A lot of people in situations like this, like I see people posting on Facebook and Instagram all the time. They're working out every day and they're doing total body
Yeah.
stuff, and they don't
Yeah.
realize that they're actually causing themselves a detriment because they're
Mhm.
not giving their bodies time to recover.
Right.
Now, are they burning calories, so to speak? Yeah, but what the hell's the sense of burning calories just for the sake of burning calories? You know what I
Right.
mean? If you're going to do it, if you're going to put forth the effort, then make sure you're doing it and making a conscious effort to make sure that you're getting the most out of it.
Right. And the total caloric expenditure of exercise is actually relatively low over the course of an entire day. And the numbers I've seen,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how active you are, it's about 10 to 30% of all the calories that you burn over the course of a day come from activity. The majority
Right.
of what you burn is from your metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, exercise is a stress. And what a lot of people don't understand is recovery is every single bit as important as generating
Yep.
that initial stress. It's
Yes,
50-50.
indeed.
It's not 30-70. It's not 60-40. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the importance of recovery and of limiting set volume is your muscles actually recover fairly quickly. Muscle protein synthesis returns to baseline levels about 48 hours after your workout. But
Right.
your central nervous system is also taxed because of intense exercise. And at
Mm-hmm.
least in the short term, your immune system function goes down a little bit because of intense exercise.
Right.
So you have to worry not just about your muscles, but you have to worry about your central nervous system, and you have to worry about your joint health. And because joints receive a lot less direct blood flow, they take longer to recover, as anybody with a knee replacement or a back injury knows. Joints take a
Right.
long time to heal
Oh
compared to
yeah.
muscles.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're going into the gym with the primary purpose of trying to build muscle, like a lot of individuals do in the gym, you should at least be somewhat aware of the impact that your actions are having on your central nervous system and on your joints. And if long-term joint health is a concern of yours, and it should be,
Oh yeah.
you should train with the mindset that you want to perform the least amount of exercise necessary to get the best degree of results, and then only train as little as you need to keep getting the best degree of results.
Yeah.
You and I both probably know people that have the assumption in their head that if you train long enough, you're going to have aches, pains, or injuries. Or even worse, there's a lot of people that view those as a badge of honor. Oh yeah, my
Mm-hmm.
back's messed up. I can't squat 500 pounds anymore. But that's because,
Right.
when I was 20, I was a badass. It's like, I get that,
Mm-hmm.
but look at where it's left you now when you're trying to run around after your kids, when you
Yeah.
can't go up a flight of stairs because your knee is jacked up.
Yep.
Long-term quality of life concerns need to be apparent when you're gauging how you're going to approach your workout, at
Yeah.
least in my point of view.
Oh no, you're absolutely right. I tell people all the time, what good does it do you to, be at your ideal weight and, be at the body fat that you want to be and look the way that you want to look if you're putting so much stress on your body to make that a
Yeah.
reality that you are sacrificing the quality of your life in the long term. You may feel
Mhm.
great now, but I mean, I'm 53 years old. I'm beat the fuck up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
done a lot of stuff over the years, long before I got into fitness. I did a lot of things. I mean, even when I was 400 pounds, I worked as a mechanic, and I'd pick up engine blocks and walk around with them. Where you wanted that, you know what I'm saying? Because I
Yeah.
was always strong, and I did
Mhm.
it because I could. And now I'm suffering with arthritis in my hands, and I've
Yeah.
got joint aches and pains everywhere. Obviously, I had to have a knee replaced. These are all things that happened because I was focused on the present and not on the future. At the end of the
Right.
day, it's all about longevity and how long that you can maintain that healthy lifestyle and your quality of life. I mean,
Right.
let's call a spade a spade. Let's talk about Ronnie Coleman for a second here.
Yeah.
That man was pound for pound one of the strongest bodybuilders that has ever lived. Some of the lifts
Mhm.
that guy did were just absolutely insane. And look at him now. Look at all the surgeries he's had to have. He's had, I don't know how many times he's had to have his back fused and his hips
Yeah.
replaced and everything else. For what? For what?
Right.
You
And
know?
I would contract Ronnie's story with a guy like Dorian Yates, who I don't know if you followed much of his
Yeah.
career after he got out of
Yeah.
bodybuilding. Gave up gear completely. As a great interview on Joe Rogan's podcast. When he retired, he just
Mm-hmm.
hopped off of steroids and he's like, I'm done with bodybuilding.
Right.
Can't train in the same manner because he tore his tricep so badly that it forced him to retire. But here's a guy, you
Mm-hmm.
still look at him, he's still in amazing shape.
Oh yeah.
Big dude, so, uh, big into yoga, big into spirituality and
Mm-hmm.
enjoying his time in his life with his wife. But if he wants to go biking, he goes biking. If he wants to go hiking with his kids and his dog, he does that. And
Right.
that's what it's all about. Now, a certain amount of that, I guess we'll call it sacrifice, is necessary if you want to be the best in bodybuilding or strongman or powerlifting, just because of the nature
Mm-hmm.
of the sport. But for the average individual, and talking about injuries, there's three types of injuries. There's chronic injuries, which are ones that will last you a lifetime. Some people always have back pain. I
Mm-hmm.
have a good buddy of mine, he's a little bit younger than me. He still has a torn bicep from doing 400-pound bent over rows. Um, it has had knee operated on, has a couple of his vertebrae fused. That's a chronic injury. He will always have aches and pains because of that.
Yep.
There's acute injuries, like if you do something in the short term, you strain a ligament or a tendon, it might put you off for a few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But the real danger with improper exercise is subacute injuries, when you're causing micro trauma to the joints or the muscles that you may not feel, but cumulatively over a long enough period of time causes an injury.
Yeah.
Cashiers at grocery stores, they don't feel it in the moment when they're scanning things,
Mm-hmm.
but if they do that the wrong way, week after week, year after year, they end up with
Mm-hmm.
carpal tunnel because of the accumulation of subacute injuries.
Right.
And resistance training, or exercise by extension, if properly performed, should be beneficial for the body.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I do when I exercise, and what I recommend for people, is if I do chest and back on one day, I don't do any other workouts until chest and back is fully recovered. The body
Right.
has a fixed amount of biochemical resources available for
Mm-hmm.
systemic or localized recovery. So if I blast chest and back and I'm really sore, I'm achy, I'm feeling not all there
Mm-hmm.
mentally, tired, you can tell that systemic fatigue that happens with hard workout.
Right.
And then the next day I do legs. Now I have to divide those limited number of resources available between two
Mm-hmm.
things to try and recover. So I, and again, because muscle loss doesn't happen nearly at the rate that most people think, that muscle's not going anywhere. So if I have to
Mm-hmm.
do workout A and then wait 4, 5, 6, 7 days before I do workout B, that chest and back isn't going anywhere. And then I can do
Right.
legs, and then I can fully recover from legs. And then I can do shoulders and arms once I'm fully recovered from that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but those long-term considerations, you're absolutely right, need to be considered
Yeah.
for any individual that is looking towards their long-term health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like I always said when I was going through my journey and I wanted to reach the point of health that I wanted to reach, that I was it was all about me being around for my wife and my kids and my grandkids and
Mm,
maybe my great grandkids. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
And I just look at it as doing stuff recklessly, not being mindful about what it is that you're doing and understanding what you're doing. And that's the biggest thing. So many people don't understand. But
Yeah.
doing all those things um, without a focus on the long term, you might as well be pissing up a rope because you're going to be okay for a while, but in the end, it's going to wind up coming back down at you. You know what I'm saying? Um,
Yeah.
so that's where I'm just like I try to tell everybody, be smart. You don't need to. If you have 50 pounds to lose, you didn't put that 50 pounds on in a day. You didn't put it on in a month. Most cases, it took a period of time to put it on. So if you're
Mhm.
trying to get healthy, give yourself a break, man. Give yourself time to let your body do what it needs to do.
Yeah. Agreed. And really connect emotionally with what you're doing in the first place and why you're doing it.
Hmm.
And you said
Yeah.
it, the longevity to be around with the family. I don't know how familiar you are with my story, but at my heaviest, I was 297 pounds. I was a volunteer firefighter,
Hmm.
um, full-time school, full-time work. And I knew that heart attacks were the number one killer of firefighters. And I knew with a newborn daughter that if I kept going on the path that I was going with gaining weight, that I was probably going to have a heart attack in my 40s, and my daughter would
Hmm.
have to grow up without knowing me. And the thought of that brought me so much pain that I knew I had
Right.
to find something to take control of my health again.
Hmm.
And you need to train respective to your goals. And if your
Yeah.
goal is to be the strongest person you can, um, you will have to give some consideration to joint health. And
Yeah.
that's a decision that every individual is going to have to make on their own. But if you just want to build muscle, get in better shape, be healthier, look better naked, um,
Hmm.
you can do it in such a manner that you can have healthy joints for the rest of your life. I'm a
Yeah.
big believer that if you diet and if you train for optimal health, or as close to optimal as you can consistently adhere to, you're going to have the rational consequences of building muscle and losing fat.
Right.
Um, yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. So now, I want to touch on one more thing here. We talked about how people can go about, setting themselves up with a home workout if they don't have any kind of equipment or anything.
Mhm.
But how can someone? Because one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on this particular episode was because I know that you are so knowledgeable about isometrics. How can people apply, like if their circuit is they're doing push-ups, chin-ups, maybe some sit-ups and some body weight squats. How do people apply isometrics to those particular exercises?
Sure. The advantage of isometrics is it's a lot more friendly for people that may not have the same degree of conditioning or might have a lot more weight to lose compared to the average individual.
Right.
um, you're actually stronger in an isometric hold than you are lifting a weight. So for an average individual that can do a bunch of push-ups, no problem, I probably wouldn't recommend isometrics because an isometric push-up is going to take forever to get to that point where you can't do them anymore. But if you
Mm-hmm.
have 50, 60, 100, maybe 200 plus pounds to lose, you could do an isometric push-up from your knees. You never want to lock out a joint against resistance. So if somebody
Mm-hmm.
can't do maybe more than a couple push-ups or maybe has to do push-ups from their knees, one of the best things you can do is get in a normal push-up position and then just bend your arms till you're maybe about halfway or three-quarters of the way through that range of movement and just hold that
Mm-hmm.
as long as you can, whether it's 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. And it'll reach a point when your arms start shaking and it starts getting really difficult. And you want to hold that as long as you can. And eventually, if you're fighting, you're going to slowly end up lowering yourself to the ground and you'll be unable to essentially push yourself back up. Well,
Right.
what's happened in that particular example of that set is you have a muscle or a group of muscles, the chest, triceps, anterior
Mm-hmm.
deltoid, your abs are contracting isometrically to help stabilize your torso, contracting
Right.
against resistance to the point of momentary muscular failure. And then once you can no longer do it, you safely lower yourself, minimize any impact on the joints, and make the exercise as safe as possible. And you have
Mm-hmm.
elicited the growth response in that targeted muscle group.
Right.
So then, if you can't do any traditional repetitions, then if you have a stopwatch or if you just record yourself with your phone, you can go back and you can see, well, how long did it take me to reach that point where I couldn't hold that position any longer? And if
Mm-hmm.
it's and the absolute number doesn't really matter, but that gives you something that you can track objectively. So then 2 days later, if you're brand new, or 3 days later, or a week later, or whenever you go back and do that same workout again, now you know that if I had 15 seconds before I could no longer do that push-up again, now I'm going to try and get at least 15 seconds. Hopefully I can get 20 seconds in that same position. Again, regardless of the movement, your job when you go to work out is to just stimulate a size and strength increase. That's how I would do push-ups. I mentioned earlier, if someone can't do chin-ups, one of the things you can do is if you have something like at least a reinforced rafter. I have an I-beam in my basement, even though I do have workout equipment. If you can't do a pull-up, just reach up, grab the bar, and slowly, you don't just want to grab and rip a weight ever because of the amount of force you can generate, but
Right.
build tension in the muscles, and then try and do a pull-up and pull as hard as you can, even if your arms are straight up overhead. Again, don't make the mistake of conflicting contracting with contracted. So you can have the muscles in the elongated position, but they can be contracting against resistance. And if you're working the major muscle groups of the body through a push-up type movement, a pull-up type movement, or bodyweight squats, and I have a bodyweight squat video on my YouTube channel. Sorry for the selfish plug, but I break down a bodyweight squat in 10 minutes before I demonstrate it. And then it takes every single 1 second of those 10 minutes to elaborate on the things that need to be considered. But if you can't even do a bodyweight squat, even things like sitting on the edge of the couch and slowly standing up builds resistance and tension in those muscles. Anything that you can track objectively, either through like a time under tension or a number of repetitions or a number of weight that you use, can be used to objectively measure progress. And so those are the movements that I would have somebody focus on, and I would track their numbers on a workout by workout basis. And then what we would really focus on, especially if they had a lot of extra weight to lose, would be diet. And what could we do to get their weight down, to improve their health and their energy? And I think you and I would agree, more than anything else, to control hunger. People, for the most part, are going to eat until they're full. I think that's what calorie counting gets wrong, is people are generally going to eat until they're full. So how can we get somebody full without going over their calorie limit and still getting them all the macro and micronutrients that they need? So that's how I would work with people that could possibly only do isometrics. But if you're overweight, if you have physical limitations because of range of movements, isometrics are fantastic. You can absolutely build size and strength and an appreciable physique emphasizing isometrics. And real quick to wrap that up is isometrics will take a lot of flack from bros, but and they'll say they don't work, but stiff-legged deadlifts, a lot of people say, is a great movement for the hamstrings, but the hamstrings are only contracting isometrically in a stiff-legged deadlift. Nobody argues the size and strength increases that can accompany a properly performed deadlift, even for muscles like the lats. But the lats and the core are contracting isometrically. You're not really moving your elbows, posteriorly to contract the lats as you're doing a deadlift. But nobody argues that the isometric contraction is not able to build a size and strength increase. So yes, isometrics absolutely can be used in a very safe, very effective, and very efficient manner to build a better physique. You just have to be safe about it and know what you're doing.
Exactly. And let's go back and touch on bodybuilding for just a quick second. Ask any bodybuilder when they're doing posing practice, and they actually have to practice to pose. Everything that they do is constantly holding and flexing for long periods of time. That's isometrics. In essence, they're applying isometric force to flex their muscles, and they're having to hold it for an extended period of time. They're having to lock their core. And if you watch these guys, that is like a total body thing, because they start from the ground up. They literally, every pose, they could be doing a front double bicep, and they start from the ground up every time they move into the next pose. And their entire body is tensed, and they're out there sometimes for a half hour at a time doing that stuff.
And you see a lot of guys cramp up, and And you see a lot of guys sweat too, and you don't realize until you actually start posing for a show. You might only have a couple minutes as you're going through the 7 mandatory poses when you're on stage for prejudging or the actual night show. But you're right, you're flexing every muscle group, and you're flexing as hard as you can while trying to control your breath. Because if you're breathing heavily because it's metabolically demanding, you're going to lose form, and it's going to cost you points. Yeah, isometrics are very, very, very challenging, but they have to be done in a safe manner, like any other exercise.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. All right, my friend, you got any other things you want to touch on real quick while you're here?
No, I just want to say I really thank you. I appreciate you having me on again. I would love to talk to you sometime on my podcast and really just go deep into your story.
Absolutely.
But I always enjoy this. It's one of the highlights of my days talking to you.
Yeah, me too. And the audience is just going to have to get used to seeing you around because you and I are friends, and we have a lot of the same mindset about things, and that's why I always enjoy sitting and talking with you like this, and I do it on a podcast because that way all my listeners get the benefit of it too, because there is so much misinformation when it comes to the fitness industry. Nutrition and fitness. I mean, for every idea out there that's correct, there's 20 that are wrong. And then you and I cut through the bullshit. We get right down to the nitty gritty, and that's what I like, without a doubt.
Agreed.
Yep. All right. Well, sit tight 1 second. I'm going to wrap this thing up, and then I'll come back, and we're going to have some parting words.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. You know the deal. When Jerome comes on, we always have a real good episode and we get a lot of good information. So I know you guys got value out of this video. Do me a favor. Share it with a friend. Go ahead and click the subscribe button. Hit that bell so that way you get notified when the new episodes of the JAK'ed podcast drop. Until I see you again, you know my motto. Playtime's over. Time to go to work.